Kenyans from all walks of life thronged to the parliament precincts and queued patiently to view the body of the former head of state. Some traveling from as far as Kakamega to pay their respects to the late former president.
Hani nakuambia nilishikwa na usuni vile nilisikia president akitangaza. Ni rais mwenye nilipenda sana. So kwa hivyo nasafiri kutoka Kakamega kule Shinyalu kwa vijiji kule. So paka nafika hapa Nairobi kuona mwili. Nashukuru kwa ajili ya kupata nafasi kuenda kutazama mwili.
Nyumbani ni Kakamega, Lwandeti Mahanga. Nilikuwa nampenda sana president wetu na alituongoza vizuri, akatuletea maendeleo, ndio maana nikasema nifike hapa.
Kenyans eulogizing Kibaki as a leader who drove the country's economy forward and engineered reforms in the education sector.
Tusaidia sana upande wa ujenzi wa taifa. Kitu ya kwanza alifumbua upande wa CDF, kutoa shule free education, hospitali free.
Tunajivunia kwake yeye kwa sababu ya free primary education, kwa sababu ya gharama. Je, ingekuwa wakati huo na sasa ile gharama ambao ya wazazi wangelipa na wakati huu vile economy vile iko sasa, wazazi wangeumia sana.
Nakumbuka marehemu Kibaki kwa kazi kubwa ambayo alifanya akiwa president, kwa kutengeneza mabarabara nyingi na pia stima.
Kibaki alikuwa mzuri juu alitengeneza Thika highway, super highway.
Tulikuwa natukuta na chafu. Anatuambia tuvae viatu. Anasema vijana wa country basi waoge, wasaidie vile wanaweza oga na wavae viatu. Kwa hiyo siwezi sema mzee alikuwa mbaya. Kama ni pesa kusaidia alikuwa anapewa vijana sana.
The body of the late president will lie in state at parliament until Wednesday, with Kenyans urged to turn up in large numbers to pay their respects.
And of course, the process continues today and tomorrow. The convoy escorting the body of the late president left the Lee funeral home at 10 minutes to 7, headed for Parliament buildings. The exercise was conducted with military precision. At 10 minutes to 7 a.m. at Lee funeral, a Kenyan flag-draped casket was hoisted on a military carriage. Headed for Parliament buildings for the solemn ceremony of viewing the body of Kenya's third president, Mwai Kibaki. The convoy snaking through Valley Road, Kenyatta Avenue to Uhuru Highway, Parliament Road, and finally to Parliament buildings at exactly 7:15. The Kenya Defence Forces soldiers lifted the casket from the carriage to Parliament buildings.
National salute! Present arms!
As the military band hummed solemn tunes from their instruments. Then senior dignitaries and government officials started to stream to Parliament buildings as the military continued to prepare the body for viewing. 10 minutes to 10 a.m., the Deputy President, Dr. William Ruto, arrives in Parliament buildings to usher in President Uhuru Kenyatta, who would arrive 12 minutes later to lead the nation in celebrating a man described as a gentle giant, an economist par excellence, and the initiator of a free primary education. The body of the late president lying on a white presidential standard flag, which is the standard he used during his reign as president. Retired Bishop of the Catholic Archdiocese of Nairobi, Cardinal John Jue, would read a few convocations before the body viewing began.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning.
President Kenyatta and First Lady Margaret Kenyatta leading the park, followed by President Kibaki's family, the Deputy President, service commanders, speakers of both houses of Parliament, Majority and minority leaders in both chambers, cabinet secretaries, senior government officials and opinion leaders in the country, diplomats and finally members of the public. The body viewing will continue on Tuesday and Wednesday ahead of interdenominational service at Nyayo Stadium on Friday and the burial ceremony in his native Othaya home on Saturday. And Narok County Commander Kizito Mutoro, who served as the late President Mwai Kibaki's personal bodyguard for 10 years, eulogized the former president as an astute, charming and charismatic leader. Kizito described the late president as a jovial and forgiving man who never missed church, where he freely mingled with Kenyans from all walks of life.
Familia hiyo, kwa sababu tumekaa nao na mzee kwa miaka mingi sana. The close protective unit ile yake.
John Kizito Mutoro, who worked for the late former president for the 10 years as the leader of the close protection unit, has hailed the late leader as a man who highly valued education and even urged his security personnel to put emphasis on the same.
Alikuwa anapenda elimu sana. Na kila mara kitu kikitokezea lazima tu angeleta tu furaha. Kwa hivyo alikuwa ni mzee mcheshi, rafiki na ni baba.
He called on Kenyans to emulate him as he was a non-tribal leader ready to lend an ear to everyone.
Alikuwa ni president ambaye anajua kutupatia mwelekeo kwa pati ya elimu. Hakutaka kujua ni nani, unatoka wapi, si ati labda ingekuwa ati ni Mkikuyu ama ni mtu kutoka Gema ama kutoka zile area. No. Familia hiyo ilikuwa inatoa accommodate zote.
According to the police boss, Kibaki was a prayerful man who never missed a Sunday service and did not prefer a special seat for him in church.
Kila wakati tulikuwa tukifanya sala, kuomba. Kila wakati kama hatujakula tunaomba, kila mahali tunaomba. Sundays tunaenda kanisa na anafuata kanisa vile inaendelea. Mzee alikuwa ni mtu wa kuforgive. Mtu akimkosea, wale walikuwa mkimkosea, kisha mwambie tu pole kuishi.
He fondly remembered the many times the former head of state used humor and charisma to lighten up the room every time during work.
Mzee mwenyewe alikuwa ni mcheshi. Malipota alingeweza kukutana na watu, unasikia tu ni story, mambo hiyo, hata ungejua ni president. Alikuwa na interact na kila mtu.
Members of the public have been given an opportunity to pen down their commiserations in honor of the late President Mwai Kibaki from today at the CDF offices in Othaya. Burial preparations are meanwhile ongoing at the President's residence in Othaya, Nyeri County. A requiem mass will be held on Saturday 30th at an approved stadium in Othaya, followed by the burial at his rural home.
Somber mood continues to engulf in Othaya, Nyeri County as political and religious leaders and residents mourn the demise of former President Mwai Kibaki. Members of the public will be able to jot down their commiserations through the office of CDF in Othaya. Gathe Muruga, who worked for Kibaki at State House for 22 years, eulogized Kibaki as an outstanding person with passion for development.
Tena uhusiano wake na watu wale wengine ulikuwa wabere sana kusimama na kuongea na mtu na roho safi na tena mkarimu, ikiwa ni kukusaidia yoyote
la kwake tutamumiss tena hata kwa golf club huko Nyeri.
Other political leaders led by Gatundu South MP Moses Kuria said Kibaki was a true economist who valued the affairs of development for the nation.
High sense of what we call cause-effect relationship. He knew when I do this, this will happen. And that's why he was able to have very balanced development in this country.
And as I said, he was a man of few words. He would then leave. And we used to love him. And he was a good man.
Those years that he served in government, we have never had any allegations leveled towards him concerning corruption. So That is something that we should emulate as leaders.
Othaya Teaching and Referral Hospital, now that is what it is called now. It should be called Mwai Kibaki Othaya Teaching and Referral Hospital in honor of our departed sage.
Only set for the burial ceremony, which is scheduled to be held this Saturday at approved stadium in Othaya.
Right, time for us now to have a look at what the papers have about this man who never wore his military fatigue, the man who never wore his ceremonial uniform, and he was just in his suit and was fine with it. Victor, probably you can tell us what you have and the papers you have there.
All right, I have got two newspapers here.
Okay.
The Daily Nation and the Star newspaper. Let me start with the Daily Nation. On the front page, a nation mourns. On the front page of the Daily Nation, a nation mourns, a splash of military color and tradition amidst grief as the remains of former President Mwai Kibaki lie in state in Parliament buildings, where thousands lined up yesterday to pay their last respects to a leader described as revolutionary and visionary. That story is fleshed out there for you on page 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. You can take a look at that story. On the front page, another fuel crisis as EPRA sleeps on job. Not again, Curia. Not again. Not again. So barely a week after the government pledged a return to normalcy in the fuel sector, motorists are once again staring at a countrywide shortage that is blamed on pricing and supply model that favors big multinationals who control the market. Who is suffering? The motorist. All right. Quickly, on the second page, there was that story, if you can remember, there was a story of an obituary that went viral on social media. And now it's been fleshed out there for you on page 2, so you can take a read on what it meant. And now CS Magoha urges judges to stop new curriculum case. Of course, Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha has asked 3 High Court judges to dismiss a petition seeking to block the implementation of the competency-based curriculum, otherwise known as CBC. All right, very quickly on the fourth page here, fourth page, Uhuru leads Kenyans in paying their last respect to Kibaki at Parliament. The body of Kenya's third president will lie and all the golfing societies. He was instrumental in leading all the initiatives, even in the ladies section. Touching a bit on the junior golf area, he was also very instrumental because all these lie under the patronage of KGU, because all these are bodies that govern the game of golf in Kenya. So we would say that he has done a lot of different strides in making sure that everybody is enabled.
Commercial plan. Don't borrow a short-term loan to finance a long-term project.
Repeat that.
Don't borrow a short-term loan, a loan for a short time, to finance a long-term project. What we were suffering from before Kibaki's era, and which is the case now, is reckless borrowing to build huge, humongous long-term infrastructure, but requiring us to pay those loans within a very short time.
And with higher interest.
With a higher interest. In fact, you get suffocated, and when you are struggling to pay, the delayed payments attract penalties,
yes.
And therefore the loan never gets repaid. It keeps snowballing, and that was cardinal sin number one that this country committed, and I'm saying this as an expert in finance. The other intellectual tactic that President Kibaki used in his approach to managing the public affairs,
yes.
He sought to make wealth to tax.
Okay.
He sought to make wealth in Kenya to tax it.
Yes.
But what we are doing here in Kenya now is we are taxing Kenyans to make wealth. Yeah, we are doing the inverse of what prudent economic management requires. Because therefore, we are taxing, and until we will one day find nobody or nothing to tax. what President Kibaki's economic policy was, spur the economy. And then out of the economic performance, you can actually tax. And that is why people were voluntarily, paying tax and doing what they did.
But I think it is quite possible even right now.
It is quite possible. This is why I'm saying that, as managers say, you are only good as your management, and therefore,
absolutely,
even when we choose in this country to put the correct managers in our public over our public resources, then we will get there. Because remember, the practical example I'm giving for President Kibaki's approach, and at that time, President Uhuru was actually Deputy Prime Minister and Minister in charge of planning. And look back at how President Kibaki introduced an equated government expenditure in virtually every constituency and ensured that that government expenditure through construction of hospitals, construction of roads was done by local contractors. And therefore, the money was actually devolved to the locals and started generating a multiplier effect that created wealth that was being
and
taxed
even
now
that,
to generate
the initiation of new projects were rather low.
Rather low and targeted. It is not like now you wake up, there are double-decker roads in the in the city,
which again is not bad.
They are good for optics, but extremely damaging in terms of your sovereignty and independence. Because if you cannot service your debts, if you cannot repay your loans, then you are actually a pauper. You are a beggar. It doesn't matter how flowery the residence you have constructed looks. You will be sleeping, agonizing, and hungry in that residence. So I congratulate President Kibaki posthumously for really doing real economics rather than political economics.
We can never exhaust this conversation, but let's take a break. And when you look at the screen there, Kenyans are already lining up to, taking their position, patiently waiting. This is a point where you exercise your patience, because it's a military affair once again, and everything has to be done in order. 10 minutes to 8, and I believe at any moment from now, the doors will be opened to the public to view the body. And several people moved, Kenyans came in droves yesterday, today, and even tomorrow. You still have that opportunity. It's open to the public. Go to Parliament buildings. To some people, it may be the first time they're stepping in Parliament. So take all the opportunity that you have and pay your last respect to the fallen gentle giant, as Jacob Kure would put it, gentle giant. Of course he is. Gentle giant. Jacob?
Yes, Mwai Kibaki was a gentle giant. Like I said, he doesn't have to swing his fist to show you he's powerful. He is powerful, but still doesn't want to, exert that pressure on you, so you realize that he's a powerful man, and he's a man who carried himself with grace. By the way, Victor, I happen to come from the neighboring constituency.
Okay.
From Mathioya constituency. He's from Othaya constituency, and probably can say we enjoyed feeling the warmth of the presidency.
Of power. But
you didn't know that, did you?
But do you say?
No, you didn't know that. So obviously when we talk about President Kibaki's legacy, I can actually tell you, and this is a personal experience, Mathioya was a very dark constituency up until when Mwai Kibaki assumed the presidency. Dark in the sense that the electricity connection in Mathioya was quite a big problem. But courtesy of, being a neighbor, light came too.
So we did good neighbors.
Yeah, good neighborliness. And that is what Mwai Kibaki is to a lot of people, particularly in Nyeri, Murang'a, and so many other areas, because in terms of electricity connection, you will remember he was the pioneer of rural electrification, not just in his central backyard. But I'm sure even Wakili Stephen Mugaka can tell you how Nyamira looked like and how it looks today. Obviously, because of the same. But Coming back to the spot of golf, but of course the pictures on your screen right now are still the number of people queuing up to see the body of the late President Mwai Kibaki. That process will begin at 9 a.m., but the body is already in Parliament building. So if you just woke up or just catching up with us, the body arrived at Parliament buildings at around, it was actually 10 minutes to 7. That's when the body ended up at the Parliament buildings, and therefore just what is ongoing preparations for the public viewing. But for now, we'll take a short breather. Obviously, when we come back, we pick up with a conversation. But then there are a few graphics I need to show you of the life and times of President Mwai Kibaki. Don't go too far.
Sonane.
In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on the beautiful show. Fare thee well, President Mwai Kibaki. We still continue monitoring events at the Parliament buildings where the public viewing of the body of the late President is ongoing. And in a bit, we'll be changing conversations and we'll be talking to two professors. One of them is Professor Sam Ongeri, who is a senator for Kisii County. He was actually Education Minister, and President Mwai Kibaki now aspiring to be governor in the same county of Kisii. I also have Professor Nchemi Ntiba, who is the Chief Administrative Secretary at the State Law Office, and obviously having two professors on set to talk about the legacy of President Mwai Kibaki. But probably we can take the last comment from Ronald, and then Victor will take the last comment from Stephen Mogaka. But they are not gone, because we'll come back with them in a bit once we're done with the two professors. But your last word for this hour, Ronald, so we pass it over to Victor.
Oh, thank you, John. Yeah, for me, for now, as you said, we'll be back. But what we are just saying is we keep celebrating a great statesman and also a very instrumental gentleman who came to change the game of golf. And as we've gone through the interviews, just to keep saying that he has left a big mark and big shoes to be filled, even as the patron of Kenya Golf Union. And I'm sure these are shoes that I'm sure everybody as a golfer and Kenyans are looking forward to see who will be able to fill the shoes that the late former president has left. And we'll keep carrying on with the discussion once we're back.
Absolutely, because we would want to know how the Golf Union plans to honor President Kibaki. But Victor, talk to Stephen, obviously, as we usher in the two professors.
Yes, before we took a break, Mogaka, you're talking about the level of borrowing. Briefly, how can we undo this?
How we can do this is actually like President Kibaki presided over a radical surgery of the judiciary. We must, as a country, do a radical surgery of the executive.
Yes.
Starting from putting into place in August 2022, putting in place a serious legislature that is going to oversee and debar the executive from this level of borrowing, as we set out a program of renegotiating these loans, roll them over to be extremely long-term, and then spur our economy to grow and be able to service those loans. And before you let me off, Victor, permit me to, even if we are in a somber morning mood, permit me to celebrate and congratulate our students who excelled in examinations that were released a few days ago. And lest you forget, my school, which I mentor, support, Nyakeore Secondary School, became the best sub-county school in the Republic of Kenya. So I congratulate the parents, teachers, and students of my Nyakeore Secondary School. In fact, I was there for a prayer meeting 2 days before this miracle performance, and I encourage every other school to give the children we have the best.
Absolutely.
Nyakemincha, Kibirigo, Sironga Girls High School, and my schools are in West Mugrango. I give you a thumbs up.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Wakili, we're not done yet.
Yes.
We'll come back with you later on. We still have got so much more to talk about, because talking about President Mwai Kibaki in just 1 hour will be not be possible, but we'll try as much as possible to make sure that we cover whatever we can. Let Wakili to have his cup of coffee. Yes, cup of coffee as on this end, and of course you can also make your way to Parliament buildings and have that moment. And you know, it's an opportunity of a lifetime. So many people probably have never met the late president in person, but well, nonetheless, it's a situation that we are in as a country, and you can make your way to Parliament buildings and pay your last homage to the fallen gentle giant that is President Mwai Kibaki. Okay, so here we are. And as we speak right now, the event is still taking place. We'll give you that those live pictures from Parliament if we have them. We'll have those live pictures from Parliament buildings, and of course, it's a military affair, as we correctly put it. There you have it. Exactly. And the military officers are already taking their positions. If you can take a look, a keen look, all the soldiers there are standing at the four corners of where the body is laid. And they're standing there with all their hands gently put on top of each other. That is a sign of mourning and a sign of ready to protect their fallen hero, the former commander-in-chief. And that picture, all of them are standing at attention with their heads slightly bowed, again a sign of mourning and respect of the fallen head of state. That is the way it's supposed to be. And they're going to stand like that for an hour or two, and then they will have another change of guard. As I said earlier, they are not bodyguards. They are not bodyguards. They are pallbearers, and they are meant to protect that particular area where the former head of state lies. Members of public are already taking their positions and viewing the body one by one as they pass there. Emotions ran high yesterday, as many of them could not control themselves, because for many who say that they are beneficiaries of the free primary education which was initiated by President Mwai Kibaki when he took reins of power. And as it is, this is a situation, and everybody else we can enjoy and say, Asante sana, President Kibaki. That is the situation. All of them are in the position of colonels, the top ranks in the military drawn from the Kenya Navy, Kenya Army, and the Kenya Air Force, led by a brigadier. And of course, if you look at that table where President Kibaki is laid, it's a white cloth where President, signaling the president's presidential standard, which was also a color that was his flag. And that is all the way until Saturday. In studio, we have got two professors. With me, I have got Professor Sam Ongeri, who we will engage briefly. But right now, let me hand you over to Curia to take it away. Curia.
All right, those are live pictures from Parliament, as you can see them. The public viewing of the body of the late president has started, and members of the public really in earnest, standing up in their numbers, traveling from across the country, from the breadth of the Republic of Kenya, to honor this man, President Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki. Like we said, a man who has sacrificed his life, offered his life to the service of this republic, and each and every one of us has a lesson or two to take from this man who immerses himself into the problems of the republic and decides to be a solution. That is the person. of President Mwai Kibaki. And like Victor pointed out, we have Professor Sam Ongeri, a former Minister for Education under President Kibaki. It would be interesting to also understand the work ethic of the president when they were working together. And I also have Professor Michenin Tiba, who is the current Chief Administrative Secretary at the State Law Office, and also at one point serving as honorary lecturer at Makerere University. Quite an interesting beat that is what you would say the life of President Mwai Kibaki. And Professor Ntiba will be sharing with us what is the legacy of the president, and also having, to have the little bit of honor to serve as honorary lecturer in the same university that President Kibaki was serving as a lecturer. But in a bit, I will take you a bit through the life and times of President Emilio Mwai Kibaki. If this graphics could just go a bit back to the early life of President Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki. Those are live pictures from Parliament. Those are live pictures from Parliament as the country continues to mourn President Mwai Kibaki, celebrating his life. We'll be taking you through the early life of President Kibaki all the way up until when he becomes president and after his retirement. But you continue to see the live pictures of the public viewing of the body of President Mwai Kibaki. But for now, probably, Victor, you can take it up with Professor Sam Ongeri before I show you the life and times of President Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki. Victor?
Absolutely. And, it's the second day, and the body lie in state that is in Parliament buildings. But there is something that people should understand and get to know. There are two things. The body can either lie in state or lie in repose. What do I mean? Lie in state, in this particular situation or scenario, the body of the president is lying at a government building that is designated by the state, while lying in repose would mean the body lies outside a building which is not a government building. You get the difference? Lying in repose. In this situation, the president's body is lying in state. So we have it that, and the military, as I said, you can take a look at how they're standing at attention with their hand, on top of each other, a sign of respect and somber mood engulfing that situation there, with different members of the public taking their time to view the body. Right about now, I'm in studio with Professor Sam Ongeri, who is a senator of Kisii County, as well as salivating for the same position as same county as a governor of Kisii County. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
And I must say that it must be a very hard time for you as a Kenyan, having lost President Mwai Kibaki, whom I can say was a close friend, not even your boss.
Yes, indeed. President Kibaki was not only my boss, but was also a very great friend. Unknown to many, my first encounter with President Kibaki was way back in 1960.
1960, before
Yes,
independence?
Before independence. He had just quit his job from Makerere University to come and take up a very lowly position of executive officer of KANU, fighting for the liberation and independence of this nation. And I was a student leader in India, doing my Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery.
Yes.
So when we came 1960 in the inaugural flight to Nairobi, one of our desire was to be able to see the chief executive or the executive officer of KANU.
Yes.
Because we had the desire of visiting the late President Jomo Kenyatta in Kapenguria, where he was being incarcerated with these other the big six.
Yes.
So we had a long chat, and eventually we found it wasn't going to be feasible for us to visit the late president's in
Kapenguria.
Because the then chief secretary, Sir Cavendish, could not allow us to do so, and we realized that colonialism was with us.
Right.
And so we went back. Second time when I encountered President Kibaki was when I was getting married. I had already qualified.
Hold on to that. Hold on to that. An interesting bit of history there way back from 1960. We still have got much more. But right about now, let's take a look at the graphics with Jacob Kure there. What do you have in terms of graphics? And of course, yes.
Victor, let's just have a look at the legacy of President Mwai Kibaki. Looking at this, Mwai Kibaki was born in 1931 in Gatuyaine village. The parents being Kibaki Githinji and Teresia Wanjiko. Now, the education of President Kibaki, he spent early school in Gatuyaine for 2 years, then went to Karema Mission School, Madhari School, which is now Nyeri High School, and in 1950 completes his O-levels at Mangu, then Makerere University, studying economics history, London School of Economics, BSc in public finance, and then returns to Makerere as assistant lecturer. In 1961, President Mwai Kibaki gets married to Lucy Muthoni Kibaki in the year 1961, but then comes into politics in 1960 as executive officer of KANU and aided the drafting of Kenya's independent constitution. His MP Donholm, which is now Makadara, in 1963. In 1966, he becomes Minister for Commerce and Industry. 69 to 82, Minister for Finance and Economic Planning. Then in 1974, moves his political base to Othaya. Then he's appointed Vice President in 1978. 1982, he becomes Minister for Home Affairs, still as Vice President, but 88, he's dropped as VP and goes to Ministry of Health. 1991, December, resigns from government, and in 1992, forms the Democratic Party of Kenya. That party is still vibrant up until now. In 1992, his first stab at presidency on a DP ticket, he becomes number 3. And 1997, a second stab, this time as second position, and becomes the official leader of opposition. In 2002, opposition parties united, and Kibaki won the presidency 62% against Uhuru Kenyatta's 31%. On the 29th of December, he's sworn in as president. Then in 2005, there's a divisive referendum, and this is when he fires almost his entire cabinet. 2007, you remember what happened. Kibaki wins a controversial re-election that sparked violence. Then in 2008, there's national accord. Sharing the presidency. Let's talk about his legacy locally, regionally, and internationally. Free primary education, economic revival, CDF, free speech, or what you call freedom of expression, non-confrontational politics, we've talked about it, the 2010 constitution, the war on corruption, probably it failed under him, but also he was keen on stability in Somalia and Sudan, and what you would call non-aligned diplomacy when it comes to issues of international repute for the Republic of Kenya. What did he do during his retirement? He kept off public life, kept off public affairs, regularly attended church, continued to nurse ill health. At the last public appearance, like we were saying yesterday, was during the public viewing of the late President Daniel Arap Moi. That's the life of President Kibaki in a nutshell. And interestingly, the man who keeps off public affairs after retiring from office. Quite interesting, Victor, you would agree?
Absolutely. And just to ask Prof here, what a decorated kind of a person, one head with all those accolades on him.
Well, it's quite clear that he was down-to-earth person, and he loved people. He loved that this nation should be free,
yes,
and be able to do its own things in its own way, and therefore his mindset was one of liberating this country economically.
Right.
Of course, the political stage had already been done.
Yes.
And having served with humility at the lowest position of an executive officer of KANU. And remember, during that period of time, 1960, To be a lecturer at the university was one of the prestigious.
It was a big deal.
A very prestigious
at Makerere University.
At Makerere University,
right.
At most. And therefore it was a very prestigious position. To relinquish that for a lower position and be able to fight for the liberation of this country, the independence of this country, I think is one of the greatest sacrifice a human being can make.
Right.
So from the beginning, he put his stamp of approval on what he was. A humble people, a servant of the people, wanting to serve the people and wanting to see that the people are free and emancipated from the colonial era, and also being able to participate in the economic growth of this nation.
Absolutely. Prof, you said that the first encounter with the late president was in 1960 during the inaugural flight.
Yes.
You had a chit-chat and later on you'd meet when you're walking down the aisle.
That's right. When I was walking down the aisle in 1968,
yes,
he graciously, with the late Mama, Her Excellency Mama Lucy Kibaki,
yes,
attended my wedding. And I was only a medical registrar at Kenyatta National Hospital. When I gave him the invitation, he remembered our encounter in 1960, and he said he will definitely come. And to my surprise, there he was. He turned up.
Right.
And it was very surprising. And it was one of my greatest moments in life. That somebody of that high-ranking position then in Kenya government, as it was, we were free, and we were working, and we were building up the nation. For him to be able to take moments off the busy schedule, to come and attend to our wedding, is one of the most homely thing that you can ever experience.
No wonder your friendship lasted a lifetime until you were appointed minister in his first cabinet. You were a minister, you are the Minister of Education, and then you're also a Minister of Foreign Affairs. Tell me about his passion for education.
Well, before then, I had served with him under President Mwai in the cabinet. Before he existed the cabinet to go to the opposition. And when he appointed me the Minister for Education, you remember, it was during the post-election violence.
Right.
Moments were very tense. The situations were extremely unpredictable. And therefore, we needed to stabilize the educational system. And as you will recall, he had already started the free primary education.
Yes. Which we are enjoying to date.
Which we are enjoying today. And one of the responsibilities that he gave me was, look, Professor Ongeri, I've appointed you, and I'm looking forward to you in completing the circuit of our free education from the primary sector to the secondary sector. So he mandated me to start the 3-day secondary education program in Kenya. Alongside with that, he also mandated me to be able to set up the infrastructure for both our primary and our secondary institutions. And he set aside a budget which was set aside to be able to improve the facilities in our schools. If you go around and recall that these facilities were actually started during that period of time. There had been some development before during President Mwai's era, but this is when we had one intensive approach towards the creation of reasonable facilities in our schools to accommodate the numbers. One other thing you remember during that post-election violence, we had a lot of student disturbances and upheavals, and strikes, and including the teachers who themselves were on strike. And the notable feature is that we were able to bring them around, and when I mooted to him that one of the things that we need to do in order to stem off these strikes is to start peace education.
Peace education?
Yes.
Right.
And by the way, we developed peace education curriculum to be rolled out to all our schools, having come, emerged from post-election violence. And therefore, our students needed to be reappraised of the new thinking, the new standards, and the new approach in terms of the Kenyan political profile. So there we were, very intensive, very interested in education. He provided enough money for education, and if you care, look back at the budget provisions.
Yes.
The ministry that enjoyed the PACs from the national government, the resources that were collected by a Kenya government was the Ministry of Education.
And it was so close to his heart.
And 96% of the Kenya's revenue collected locally went to education.
Amazing. We'll talk about that, and probably you'll also tell me, how was he during your cabinet meetings? How did he handle himself? Was he a combative kind of a leader, a boss, or personal lifestyle? How was he? I will discuss that with you later on, Prof. But then, Kyoria, you've heard it from Prof himself. Friendship dating way back 1960. I still ask you this question, where were you?
Very much on that, where I was in 1960.
Yes.
But I was around, but not in the physical.
I get the point.
I was around, but not in the physical. But it's quite interesting insight from Professor Ongeri, serving as Minister for Foreign Affairs and Education under President Kibaki, and then having worked with him previously under President Mwai.
Yes.
But also in studio, I'm with Professor Michelle Ntiba, who was actually an honorary lecturer at Makerere University some time ago, and he will tell us how it felt for you, Professor, serving as a lecturer in that distinguished institution where President Kibaki also was.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
You surprised me when you talked about my being honorary lecturer at Makerere University. It is so happened that in 1997, when in the process of establishing the East African community, there was a process of reviving the old institutions of the community, which went haywire after the collapse of the old community. And one of those institutions was one to manage the shared fisheries resources of Lake Victoria. The Lake Victoria Fisheries Organization at Njinja, Uganda. So it is at that time when I took that role between 1997 in July and until I came back in 2002, that part of the things I thought I should do, because I was then also, I came from the University of Nairobi, was also to spend time being part-time lecturer at Makerere University, so that I could teach some fisheries science and also supervise postgraduate students in their MSc and PhD. Well, of course, people talk about Kibaki then and other Kenyans, which was a good feeling. I think that is what happened at that time. Yeah.
While you lecturing at Makerere University, probably give us a feel. How does Makerere University esteem President Kibaki?
Well, I think you understand that, these institutions came up through the colonial era. You see, and each of the East African countries and their own, higher education setup. And you remember here, we enrolled at the University of Nairobi, and at the time, Makerere was very prestigious for certain things. Dar es Salaam was prestigious for law. I think University of Nairobi was prestigious for, engineering and things like that. But that was the setup at the time. But you see now, there are so many universities now, where the university education has expanded, which I think is good for our countries, because Chinese have a saying, when you train your people halfway, those people are half useful. And also they can be very expensive in terms of the kind of mistakes that they can make. I think at the time, Nairobi was also an esteemed university. They were happy to have a lecturer from the University of Nairobi with them at that time. And we did a good job too. Yes.
And you did a fantastic job.
Yes.
Tell us, what was your first encounter with President Kibaki? Obviously, I know you've stayed in the Department of Fisheries, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But tell us about your first encounter with President Mwai Kibaki before I introduce Ben Troy Njui.
Mentally, I always hand off Mwai Kibaki throughout. A very learned man from Makerere, who we also went to London to do some economic things and things like that. And also, you know, his career in government as Minister of Finance. I think all of us knew him as, you know, a very, you know, good Minister of Finance in terms of organizing the economy and finance of this country.
Okay, let me cut you short because we will resume on that point because I understand Parliament buildings. Ben Troy Njui has the Nairobi gubernatorial aspirant Polycarp Igathe. Very quickly, Ben Troy, if you can hear me.
Thank you so much, JJ, back in studio, and indeed we're still at Parliament buildings, and very quickly now we're joined by one of the most famous technocrats we have here in Nairobi, and he's also gunning for the top seat here in Nairobi, the governor's seat. We are talking about Polycarp Igathe, who also had his chance, and many years he had the tutorage of the president himself, President Mwai Kibaki. But let him walk us through his memories with the former president. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much for having me this morning, and I condole with the rest of Kenya. I especially would like to send my condolences to Judy, to Jimmy, to David Kagai, and to Tony Githinji for the loss of their father. We have all lost a father. This was a great tree in the Republic of Kenya that provided shade to all of us. Alikuwa mzee wetu, alikuwa rais wetu, na alikuwa baba yetu. I interacted with Kibaki many times as a member of Kenya Private Sector Alliance, as a director of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance during presidential roundtables. I interacted with him especially one-on-one, one time at Starehe Boys Center, where he's a great believer in Starehe Boys Center. And he was very impressed that we were participating there. Then I was the managing director of Vivo Energy Shell, and Shell is a big sponsor of Starehe Boys Center. And he explained to me the history of politics in Nairobi. Operation Jack Scott, when local population and local businessmen were sent away, and children were left without parents because their parents had gone to jail. And he explained to me the essence of that. And I remember his words on that day. He said, "Thank you for continuing to keep alive hope. And you should never give up hope. You should never give in to despair." And for me personally, Kibaki was an inspiration. I also met him back in 1993. That is the first time I interacted with him, really, when I was a student leader at the University of Nairobi. I was the national chairman or president of the International Association of Students Interested in Economics and Business Management, ISEC. And he came to address us. And I was really impressed by his credentials, and I studied economics very hard to emulate President Kibaki. Over the years, we became really good friends. And we would interact once in a while. Then I used to try and play golf. I'm not a golfer anymore. And I also interacted with him on the golf course once in a while. And I remember he had a good sense of humor when he would make a joke and say, "Chairman." Then we would call him chairman because he was chairman of the Democratic Party. And his ball would go to the bush. And I remember he would come out of the bush saying, "This ball does not respect chairmanship," you know. And he had a great sense of humor. He was a humble man. He was not into gossip. He believed gossip was terrorism, and he didn't have any small talk. He was focused, and I think we owe it to him to make sure we don't disappoint. We owe it to him, some of us who are canvassing for votes and asking that, making big promises as we are being told on the circuit, to make sure that our promises, we deliver on our promises. And Kenya will never be the same again, because once upon a time, Mwai Kibaki was president of Kenya. I'm very proud, and I'm also sad that we have lost him. but it is what it is. So the campaigns in Nairobi are on a bit of a go-slow, and to respect the spirit, to respect President Kibaki, to see him off. And as a father, I will of course be there in Othaya to see that we give him a decent burial, together with all leaders of Nairobi.
And indeed, looking at 2022, we are having the succession politics, and looking at Kibaki, he was a soft-spoken politician, but he was able to do a lot in Kenya. What lessons, you're also seeking a top seat here in Nairobi, what lessons can we get from them?
I think the biggest one is that Kibaki was an impact politician. He wanted to achieve social impact, economic impact, and political impact. He was not a commercial politician. We have two segments of politicians: the commercial ones who come to make money, and the impact ones. Kibaki was truly an impact politician, and I think that is the footsteps I would like to follow, to come in for impact, not come in for my back pocket. And he kept on saying, one of his biggest quotes is, leadership is about service, it's not about self-enrichment. And that is really my inspiration, and I'm really honored to be here on the footsteps of the great assembly of the people of Kenya at Parliament Building in Nairobi, to pay my respects to this great man.
Yes, and also you are able to interact with Kibaki on the continental showpiece because he was a Pan-African leader. What lessons has he left for Africa?
That go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there is in silence. Do your thing. That is desiderata. Nobody was better in that than President Kibaki. And he raised a good family. He was a good friend. He brought competence to government. He was the best public service manager. Him with David Mwiraria, what they did to our economy is amazing. So myself and my deputy governor, who's also here with me, Professor Kaloki, we are very committed to serving Nairobi the way Kibaki served Kenya. We will emulate him, and we hope our children will say, surely the inspiration of Kibaki, we can see it in the 5 years you have served Nairobians after we are elected. And thank you very much for listening to me. And I would like many other people to read the story of Kibaki. For me, for those who know me, even at university in the 1992, I had a friend who used to say, Polycarp, you're not only a fan of Kibaki, you're a fanatic. Because I was a young Democrat. And I still remember as a young Democrat, then I joined the Democratic Party. It was the first party I ever joined in 1992. We used to say, Toka Gizani, come out of the darkness. Kibaki was a politician of light. He enlightened. He did not generate heat. We need more of those people who bring light, not people who generate heat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much indeed. That has been Polycarp Igathe, who will also be gunning for the top seat here in the county of Nairobi. And he will not be alone. We are also privileged to have also talking to one of the...
Thank you very much, Ben Troy Njue, of course, talking to the lucky man of these corridors, that is Polycarp Igathe, and talking about his experience and his knowledge of President Mwai Kibaki. Before we went to Parliament, Professor Micheni Ntiba, you were talking about your first interaction or your first knowing of the president, and you say you only used to hear about Kibaki.
Oh yes, he was very popular.
Yes.
He was known by everybody. Something happened in terms of economy because of him. I think that's what we knew. But later on, of course, I met him when he came for politics in Tharaka Nithi. You know, there was something sentimental about Tharaka Nithi and Kibaki. That they would support him, whatever the case would be. So in many of those times that he came for those political activities in Tharaka Nithi, I met him. But the time that I met him physically was when I was appointed the first permanent secretary in the Ministry of Fisheries and Development in April 2008. That's when I met him first, when we were being, inaugurated and things like that. And I remember that day. He told me, this thing, fish, is very important in our economy. And we expect you to turn it around. And I think that was very important. You recall those days, fisheries was a very tiny little department. It was instrumental for him and government to lift fisheries from whatever it was.
Actually, you only had the agriculture and livestock, and that was it.
Yes, of course, and the fisheries was a lot there in between.
Yeah.
I also remember when I was in Jinja, Uganda, at the Lake Victoria Fisheries Organization at that time. Fisheries did not belong to any ministry. The period of 5 years I was in Uganda, it shifted ministries 6 times. And you know, the moment a department moves like that, it loses everything. It loses its history, it loses its record, it loses its manpower. So it was instrumental that the Ministry of Fisheries Development was created during his presidency.
During his presidency.
And it is through that that fisheries and aquaculture, fish farming, grew in leaps and bounds, and eventually also becoming blue economy.
The blue economy.
Yes.
And we'll talk about his work ethic, because what he tells you at that point about, turning around that department, we'd want to know how your working relationship with him. But Victor, Professor Sam Ongeri, not once, not twice, he was in the eye of a storm, obviously, because the Minister of Education is what you would say has a lot of interests.
Right.
How did the president, handle him at that point? Was there any pressure of any sort from the president himself? I would want to know that.
Prof, I think you could just answer it direct. How was the president's reaction? Pressure? But we all know that education was his brainchild, the pre-primary education. How was he?
Well, let me put it this way, that having gone through a very difficult moments in the early education,
yes,
all the way, and you've already given the chronology on how he progressed from the primary school to the secondary school, and eventually to Makerere University. He realized that the best investment one can make and be able to bring up a nation is invest in education.
Right.
And many parents were finding it very difficult to be able to support their children in primary schools, and also leave alone the secondary schools. And it became his business then that the best gift that they could give Kenyans is to be able to offer free primary education,
yes,
while at the same time offering free secondary education. And I had the opportunity to roll out. Professor Saitoti did the first part of the primary. The late Professor Joe Saitoti did the first primary education free, because he was then the Minister for Education.
Yes.
Then when I came in, I rolled out the 3-day secondary school. And together combined, we were able to improve the transition rates.
Yes.
You remember the transition rates from primary to secondary school was very low. Was very low.
Yes.
Almost about 60 or so percent. But when this free primary education came in, and there was full support, the transition rate went up to beyond 78%.
Something that President Kenyatta is actually carrying to date.
No, well, today President Kenyatta has already put it up to 100%.
Yes.
The transition rate. And that is a phenomenal record. It's not an easy thing, because you could see the biggest hindrance to that advancement towards moving the next level of educational programs was the question of resources. People didn't have resources to advance their education. Poverty levels were very high.
Yes.
And therefore, with those levels of poverty, it was very difficult for parents to get their children going higher than what they had already achieved.
Okay.
So he relieved the parents and everybody from that burden.
Right.
And it was then left to the students
to do their part. Okay. Prof, let's talk politics now.
Yes.
Kenya got to a situation where we were never used to. In 1992, we went through the process, but when it came to 2007, it was now a blown kind of affair. We never expect ourselves to be there. And that is the point that President Mwai Kibaki appointed you and other dignitaries, as well as other legislators and brilliant minds, to sit in that committee to negotiate during the Grand Coalition. Paint for me a picture how it was at that particular point, Prof.
Well, we had reached a crisis point. The country was split in the middle, and it was not going to be sustainable to run the country, given the kind of mood and the scenario that was prevailing then. And I remember one afternoon, our present president, Uhuru Kenyatta, rang me and said, the president will be looking for you shortly. They must have discussed.
Yes.
Because he was then his Minister for Finance at that time. And indeed, shortly after that, I was able to meet him, and they said, I'm appointing you to be a member of this negotiation team. And then he had appointed Honorable Martha Karua
on his side,
PNU
on his side, yes. It was you.
It was
Honorable Martha Karua.
Honorable Martha Karua, Honorable Moses Wetangula,
right,
and later on Honorable Mutula Kilonzo Senior.
Yes, the late now.
The late now. On our side. On the other side was Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, Honorable James Orengo, Honorable Sally Kosgei.
Yes.
And Honorable the current Deputy President William Ruto.
Right.
So when we went to under the chairmanship of His Excellency late Kofi Annan,
yes,
the Secretary General of the United Nations, when we went to County Hall to start off the meetings, one of the most dramatic things that I've ever experienced in my life happened. The microphones couldn't work.
What do you
Every
mean?
time, because they wanted to start a meeting,
yes,
they went straight to the meeting, and the microphones could not start. And I remembered, I said, maybe we should pray at this stage. That's how tense it was. And believe it or not, right, I don't know how the verse came to my memory, 2 Chronicles 7 verse 14. And I find myself reciting it. If my people who are called by my name humble themselves, seek my face, and seek my face, I will hear their cry, and I'll come and dwell among them. And when I prayed that, when I started praying that verse, the microphones opened up. That was a miracle that I've yet to understand why they couldn't work before. But as soon as I brought in God's providence and guidance, they just opened up. That's one feature. Secondly, when we had done the normal preliminary openings, we moved back to Serena.
Yes.
That's where the venue of the meeting was. Both sides, the ODM side, the PNU side, the first day we could hardly talk to one another.
Just looking at each other.
Looking at each other. And there was His Excellency Kofi Annan. The suspicions on both sides were very heavy. We didn't know which way, or either this way or the other way. But eventually, we broke the ice. And I did. His Excellency Kofi Annan came and said, Professor Ngeri, you seem to be more elderly than these other people. Is there something we can do? I said, yes. Maybe we should have tea together in the afternoon.
Right.
Try to have tea together. And it worked. When we want to have tea, we now started talking to each other. We recognize each other. Of course, we knew each other before. I had approached the Honorable Sally Kosgei and said, look, we've worked together before during Mwai's government.
Yes.
Here we are. We have a crisis together in cabinet.
But at this particular point, all of you had your hard lines drawn.
Oh, yes. There were hard lines drawn. And the position was that the ODM side wanted the government take over. And we said, no, it can't work. I think President Kibaki won the elections squarely, and we'll proceed. And then they said, in that case, let's have it halfway. President Kibaki does a 6 months period, and you do and the Right Honorable Prime Minister does the...
Who came up with that proposal?
No, the ODM side. And we said, this won't work. Because there's no way you can split the country into two. Say you take the first 6 months, and then later on another one takes the 6 months.
Yes.
So we disagreed. And then we started agreeing. The first thing at least we agreed upon,
right?
There must be ceasefire.
Yes.
Whatever was going on must stop.
Before we get to the negotiating table.
Before we get in the negotiating table.
Right.
And we achieved that in the first 48 hours. And you notice that's when the country settled.
Right.
Because all eyes were on us, the international community was on us, and we needed to resolve that matter. And President Kibaki, that's why I admire him so much, he was always telling us that whatever happens, you must reach at an agreeable position that will save this country from being destroyed.
Prof, it seems a lot happened behind the scenes that even most of us, even in the media, didn't know. But that's okay. That's okay. For the prosperity of a nation, there are certain things that, you know, should be kept, you know, in confidence. And that is where we are. Fast forward to where now we have the white smoke.
Yes.
A deal has been struck, and, you know, you are part of the eminent persons, you know, representing both sides, the PNU side. Finally, we are walking out at the footsteps of Arambe House. Give me the mood, how it was.
Well, what happened is that there was a proposal that one way that we can resolve this impasse is to be able to amend the constitution and provide for a position of a prime minister. And we argued for quite a period of time. And His Excellency Kofi Annan said he called for time off. And when he called for time off, he consulted the president.
Right.
And then he consulted the prime minister. And then we were called. And when we went to Arambe House, the President Kibaki, on his side, he talked to us and they said, this is the proposal, and they think looks reasonable. And we agreed. That's how the white smoke came out.
So it was that position of, let's create a position of a prime minister.
Yes.
And that is how we saw the white smoke.
And then share the portfolios.
Okay. Prof, just hold it there. John Curia, History 101. What happened? You get it.
Absolutely, you know, and I'm just mesmerized by how things change in Kenya, because at one point Professor Sam Ongeri was on the other end, Raila Odinga and his team were on the other end. Now they are together.
And you remember at some point when Raila Odinga was the prime minister, he called for his sacking.
Absolutely, you remember that? I mean, politics in Kenya is quite an interesting time.
You will tell us how he handled the situation way back then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Politics in Kenya is quite an interesting. The only thing that probably Kenyans should learn from this is that there's no room for enmity in politics. You just play from your court, and the other plays from their court, and then probably you will converge at some point. And on this other end, I have Professor Misheni Ntiba, who is the Chief Administrative Secretary in the State Law Office under President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration up until now. But we were talking about the work ethic of President Mwai Kibaki. At that point when he tells you fisheries is a near forgotten department, we need a turnaround on this. What would you say was your relationship with the president now moving forward, now that he had tasked you with that job, actually by word of mouth and by appointment?
Yes. Of course, it was difficult to grow our ministry from a tiny, almost long forgotten department. And these were the issues that I raised with the staff that were there. How do we create a ministry from a tiny department? And it was interesting, the kind of stories they give me. Well, everybody knows about Lake Victoria. So they told me their hope to make a ministry is through Lake Victoria. But they forgotten been to Lake Victoria for 5 years as the boss. And I knew that that fishery was getting to a stagnant position. Well, at that point, they also said, we have the Indian Ocean. And so I asked them, the Indian Ocean is a complex environment. It's so dynamic. Half of Kenya is there. And at the time, you know, as a new ministry, you don't have a lot of money for development. I think our development budget that year was only about 400 million. So 400 million is nothing in an ocean. So that's when I asked them what about aquaculture. Oh, there was aquaculture, yes, but we're only producing very little from aquaculture.
Yeah.
Only about 2,000 metric tons per year. You couldn't compare that with what came from Lake Victoria. So I asked them, how do we move forward? In fact, it was aquaculture that meant fisheries be known by the entire of Kenya. Because that year you also recall that there was some clash of world economy, which led to some economic stimulus programs.
Yeah.
And I think that is how fisheries got money to move forward. Because through that effort, through the economic stimulus programs, we got money from Treasury to farm fish in 160 constituencies.
160 constituencies.
And that
out
is,
of the 210 then.
Yes, and that is what grew fisheries the way we understand it today. And that's how we have fish being farmed on land, in lakes, in the sea, in dams, and so on and so forth.
Help me understand, because it is easy once you assume government, as President Kibaki did, and you find forgotten departments, you continue with the same trend of a forgotten department. From your understanding, what was this passion President Kibaki had that he would even launch aquaculture projects in 160 constituencies?
Well, the other thing I got to know, he had a long-term relationship with fisheries, sea fisheries, lake fisheries, but he also owned a fish pond at his residence in Muthaiga, which used to be serviced by fisheries officers from the department and also from Kiganjo Trout Farm. Remember where the state launch is in Sagana, and adjacent to it is the trout farm, the government trout farm, where in the olden days, in the colonial era, you know, the governor used to go and fish and eat trout at that point. And so that's why I think he looked at it this way. And I think based on that, then we grew and became what we are now. So that the fisheries ministry and the state department is quite huge now, with a new policy. We did a new policy, a new law, yes, new institutions, new people moving forward. I think that is what it was. But it seemed, at one point, he surprised me. He was talking to me about fish farming, aquaculture. And he told me this is a difficult subject. Are you leading it from the front? Or I didn't know where the president was going. I started panicking what he was about to ask.
Yes.
Are you leading it from the front? Or you have joined, you could join some of your colleagues who lead Kenyans in things that they don't believe in. So he asked me, are you farming it yourself? That was the most panicky thing.
Are you doing the farming yourself?
Yes. That was the most panicky situation I had with the president. How to answer him. Well, of course, I was lucky because my father owned a fish pond. I think that's how it started, moving forward. But I think this is important, where you have people with passion leading Kenyans forward. He told me there are those who tell Kenyans about coffee, and they don't have a single coffee plant. The others leading Kenyans in livestock, and they don't have a single unit. I panicked, I'm telling you. Yes.
When he asked you whether you're leading from the front. And of course, when you come back, we'll be talking about the field of academia, where you also come from, and in terms of expansion of a space of education in the country. And we'll talk about that.
But I also served.
Yes.
During this term of President Uhuru.
In fisheries still?
I also served as PS for university education and research.
Oh yeah.
For a short time, for about 8 months in 2018.
Oh yeah.
We can talk about
and we'll talk about that. But Victor,
yes.
Obviously, like in here, President Kibaki was leading from the front. He has a first permanent secretary who is spearheading the issue of fish farming. And then the direct question to him is, are you doing the farming yourself? Or it's just the language of the tongue.
I don't know how he answered the question. Probably if he was not.
No, he was lucky. His father was doing fish farming, so he already had a background on fish farming.
Fair enough.
He says it was a very panicky situation.
Okay. Kiore, what we just watched on our screens, there was a change of guard at the Parliament buildings there. The soldiers there you have them. The change of guard, the 4 of them who started that exercise excused themselves, they walked out, and then we've had now a new set of pallbearers there at the Parliament building. So of course, members of the public are still streaming in. As we say, it's open to the public. You can also make your way there and pay your last homage. Okay, back with the Prof here. Now, Prof, the white smoke finally came at the footsteps of Arambe House. The deal was, let's create a position of the Prime Minister.
Yes.
And Kenyans were happy, including you.
Yes, we were very happy because there was a solution to a crisis.
We could even see the smile on President Kibaki's face.
Yes.
And Raila Odinga.
That's right. The problem was over. It was back to business. Now we had to start working. And if you noticed, after that, and after the formation of a complete cabinet, I think one thing that people should appreciate, that even when President Kibaki appointed that cabinet,
yes,
he didn't appoint the full cabinet. He appointed a half the cabinet.
What was the reason then?
Because he was still looking and appreciating that out there were also other Kenyans who may not be happy with the way things had happened. And giving room for an expansion of that cabinet.
Yes.
And indeed, when this opportunity arose, he expanded that cabinet. It became 34 cabinet ministers. And then, of course, a number of assistant ministers went to about 70. But it's not the size of the cabinet that we should be talking about.
Yes.
It's on how did that cabinet function. The cabinet functioned through cabinet subcommittees.
Yes.
And there were various subcommittees set up by the president and now the prime minister. And the prime minister was given the mandate of coordinating the cabinet subcommittees, which functioned very well. And we were very happy because we worked as a team. And no wonder then that the GDP went up to 70% during that period of time.
Yes.
And the revenue, the government revenue, shot up beyond $1 trillion Kenya shilling. Before then, we were reeling at about 700
all because
billion.
there was good coordination.
There's good coordination, and also there was a rapport and a good climate. And the things were moving properly. And we achieved a lot during that period of time. And even if you can remember, that's the time we also achieved a lot of infrastructure development.
Right.
The Thika superhighway was done. The massive infrastructure development in schools and the universities, and the expansion of universities, education, the health sector. That's when the healthcare systems were being also funded, and a lot of things were happening in the health sector and the medical schools, the transport sector,
yes,
and the energy sector, including the SGR was mooted during that period of time to start, and I remember that it would have been accomplished, but the time was so short.
Yes,
during that period of time. And when President Uhuru Kenyatta took over, that was the first project he took on because it was already on the works.
Yes.
And it was moving on.
Okay.
And if you look at that development, you wonder how we were able to manage within the resource envelope that was collected locally.
Prof, it's quite interesting to note how President would carry himself, but give me the real picture of the kind of a personality he was.
A gentleman, very insightful in terms of insights.
Yes.
He had insights that you could not fathom sometimes. He had a grip of the economic, socio-economic profile of this country. And globally, having been a minister for finance for over 12 years and a vice president. So he had a grasp of the economic profile of this nation and beyond. And if you remember his association with the late Tom Boyer,
yes,
they worked together with the late President Mwai Kibaki, Mwai, Daniel Arap Moi, and the late Charles Njonjo. They used to work together as a pair, and I think that influence of wishing the country to grow further,
yes,
from one level to another, was at the top of his mind. He was not interested in pettiness.
Something that has been said here since yesterday, and Curia, it quite confirms the kind of a person he was.
Yes.
Yeah.
He didn't like any petty languages. He was interested in substance rather than pettiness.
Substance.
And he will dismiss you
rather than pettiness.
If you went to pettiness.
I will ask you this when you come back again. Were you having some, tense moment during cabinet meetings because you'd go there, submit your report to him, and then waiting for that simple question? How would you answer? The way, Prof, you were asked, are you fishing yourself? You didn't see that coming, but you are safe, off the hooks.
Quite an interesting one. And particularly, for Professor Sam Ongeri, who said right in cabinet.
Yes.
With President Kibaki. It would be interesting to hear his perspective about the same. But let's just speak from where Professor Victor left about the work ethic of President Kibaki, not being a petty person, Professor.
He was very encouraging. I think he would give you a lot of space to do what you want to think and do what you have thought. And I found that very useful, because then you would implement and report him back. I think that was his great strategy, where you were working continuously, moving to achieve a certain goal. I found that extremely important. There was not a lot of interruptions and changing of things, changing of the plan that was moving forward. That is key to development, I think, because of its continuity, because of one stone laying over another, and so on. I think that's how his strategy was like.
Most of the times you'll have bosses breathing over your neck and without giving you space to operate and be, probably implement your strategies as the person who's been given such responsibilities. How was the president in terms of giving you space to operate as the person who's been given the job?
Unless you did so boundary, he gave us total confidence and space to do what we were meant to do. I think that's what I enjoyed in fisheries.
All right, and that's why you stuck there. Let's talk about the world of academia, where you come from. In terms of expanding that space, what you found there when President Kenyatta appointed you to that department, what you found there, what would you say is President Kibaki's legacy, and what are the building blocks that he kept for you people before you occupied that office?
University education is a very important space for any country, because that then gives you the epitome of developing manpower that will take the country forward. And I found, when I arrived at the department, one was that there was a lot of clamor for new departments, new MBCD, but also it was at a time also when we had been asked, there was a moratorium to develop any more new universities. And those who had been asked before to continue with the universities were very keen to see the universities come through. I think that's the time I went there.
Yeah.
But also most important is that to know that the universities and the university unions have had, you know, strikes over and over from the early 1990s. And this was what I confronted first. At that time, we were with Amina Mohamed.
Oh, confronting the strikes now?
The strikes.
Okay.
And I think it is interesting that after we sorted it out, the universities have not been on strike since June 2018. And I pray that this is going to continue because it affects the entire sphere of learning, all the way from primary to whatever, because the young ones expect they will go to the university. And when we have frequent closures of universities, then it becomes very important. I think that was an important milestone moving forward, and we should try to maintain that.
Okay, help me correct if this could be a perception or it could be true. That previously, before the Kibaki administration, there used to exist what we would call moribund or nearly useless courses being offered in universities up until when it came, where now courses were being tailor-made to respond to the problems of the Republic.
It is important to do that, but you must understand what the aims of a university education are about. Is to produce thinkers and a new knowledge, to build new knowledge over old knowledge. You can't build new knowledge without old knowledge. And I think research then becomes key. It is very important. Research is also expensive. And I think this is one of the problems that the universities are facing now. But I also think that the change of education to introduce other departments like TVET, you know, the introduction of universities killed most of the polytechnics the way we knew them, to the extent that around some part in our country, you could not get a plumber if you needed one, or you want to work very hard, you could not get a technical person to help you with the technical things. I think that is what brought new changes into the way we are working now. TVETs are key, building skills, also encouraging professors to work with industry, to work with the local people, to work with the communities. I think that's important, so that the idea of an ivory tower, I think, almost collapsed.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Michelle Ntiba. The CS State Law Office, of course, has been PS Fisheries under President Mwai Kibaki. Thank you very much for sharing insight with us about your working relationship with the President. We continue, you know, looking at the legacy of the great man that is Mwai Kibaki. I'll throw it to Victor to engage a bit Professor Sam Ongeri, and of course bring in the first governor of the county of Kiambu, that is William Kaboko Gitau. He has two other things to say about the legacy of President Mwai Kibaki. Don't go too far. Victor?
All right, but before then, Prof, you had good working relationship with the late president. That is, there's no doubt about that. But then there is one thing that is quite common, that president never missed a church.
He was a very religious person. He appreciated the family values, and I think it was quite evident. When it was time with his family, it was time with his family.
Yes.
When it was time for the public business, it was time for public business.
When it's time for golf, it was time for golf.
When it was time for golf, it was time for golf. So he apportioned his time very, very, very in a balanced way.
Right.
And one of the notable features that has come out quite clearly is that even after the Serena and after the handshake,
yes,
the outcome of those Serena talks, one of the things that needed to be done that Kenyans had identified as an obstacle towards our peaceful coexistence and towards our peaceful development was the question of sharing of national resources.
Right.
And therefore it was felt that there must be a new constitution that will bring in all these factors that had been identified as part of the reasons why we had a crisis running to 2007, 2008. And of course, if you look back at the previous other occasions when we had skirmishes, it was always about the national resource sharing.
National resources, right.
And the inclusiveness. Rather than exclusiveness of other parts, the marginalization of other parts of the country, other areas. And therefore it was important that this should become. So when we promulgated the new constitution in 2010, the basic element that came out quite clearly is devolution.
Devolution, which was, when you talk about devolution, it's something that we are still enjoying right now. And Prof, when you look at the growth of devolution, the process that we've gone through as a nation since the promulgation of 2010 Constitution, where are we as a nation?
Let me put it to you this way. If you go to now 47 counties that were a creation of the Constitution, you'll see some measure of development in one way or the other.
Notable.
Very notable development. Why? It's because we've been able to have the national cake shared equitably to all 47 counties. And in fact also created the marginalization fund for those counties that may not have benefited from the previous developments, therefore need to catch up and be able to catch up and with the rest of the rest of the country. And this is a great thing that has happened. And that's why, if you notice before, there was no competition or people wanting to go for county seats because they were being equated as councillors. But councillors were very important people. I was the Minister for Local Government. If you knew how to deal with them and work with them, they always brought out the best of them. But devolution is a game changer.
Devolution is a game changer. And actually, as you correctly put it, everywhere you go, you'd see a notable change. You know, most of these counties, the road network is perfect. Like right now, you can drive all the way from Nairobi to Kisii comfortably.
When you come to Kisii eventually, if when I take over as our governor, you will see even a greater change.
That reminds me of the situation on the ground.
Yes.
Senator, I would be so biased if I don't ask you, ground ikoaje?
No, it's poor. It's quite right. It's quite favorable. People are looking forward to what I think. Again, it goes back to President Kibaki. What President Kibaki wanted to see is that each region thrives, and this is why some of us have opted to go to the regions so we can make it grow and have achieved that growth pattern that we achieved during the Grand Coalition.
Absolutely.
If we can transfer that growth pattern to the regional levels, this nation will be way miles ahead. So long as we learn to use our resources properly, without any element of corruption, and being able to plow and making annual development programs and things that will be able to benefit the people. That's what President Kibaki stood for, and that's what every leader should stand for. And more so, when we go to these forthcoming elections, the greatest wish from President Kibaki would have been that we go there with a peaceful mind.
And that is why there was that handshake in 2007, the first handshake, because he wanted peace in the country.
Now, President Kibaki started the first handshake. He handed over that, he infected President Uhuru Kenyatta. So subsequently, President Uhuru Kenyatta has also had a handshake. And I think this handshake should carry us through to a peaceful election. Whoever wins, let the best candidate win.
Absolutely.
But as for me, you know where I stand.
I don't know. I don't know where you stand, Prof. I don't know where you stand. Where do you stand?
No, I want a united country. I'm for Azimio. And I root for Azimio for the simple reason that it is that very element that President Kibaki worked for, that he didn't want any area marginalized.
Yes.
That now if we can bring these areas together, they will be able to reap the benefits of the wealth of this nation.
Prof, thank you so much. Thank you so much. We can talk about President Mwai Kibaki until dawn again tomorrow, but will never be enough. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be speaking to Professor Sam Ongeri, who is a senator of Kisii. He's saying that, you know what, let's have a peaceful coexistence as was preached by the late President Mwai Kibaki. Okay, Kyria.
It's time for us to engage now. The first governor of the county of Kiambu and the party leader of the Tujibebe wa Kenya party. You know, as we agonize and also celebrate the life of President Mwai Kibaki, as Kenyans continue to stream into Parliament to view the body of the late President Mwai Kibaki. And of course, there's so much to speak about, Governor Kabogo, about Mwai Kibaki. Well, first of all, thank you very much for joining us.
It's an honor to appear here.
Yes.
Although at sad times, first and foremost, I may send my condolences to the family and friends of the late President Mwai Kibaki. Such an astute politician, serious leader. And what comes into my mind when we mourn President Kibaki is that what would have happened, that comes to my mind, if we had given him a chance in 1992.
Wow.
Because he's my best so far, and probably the best Kenya will ever have in a long time. If I was told to describe President Kibaki in one word, ni kiongozi bila fitina.
Kiongozi bila fitina.
Bila fitina. And you know, fitina is our biggest problem in politics and leadership of this country. We know that it's been said, and I want to back that saying, that it is during his time that mifuko ya Wakenya ilisikia nafuu. During his time. And it was available for every other Kenyan. If we can emulate Emilio Mwai Kibaki, His Excellency Mwai Kibaki, Kenya is a beautiful country. It's a country that has potential, only with good leadership. I probably would not be there if it were not for President Kibaki myself.
And that is why I want you to take us and tell us about your first encounter with him.
My encounter with President Kibaki was, of course, when he was Minister of Finance. I met him once or twice as a young man. But in 2003, when we got elected into Parliament, I was in Juja as the Member of Parliament. And I remember, of course, when we went to Uhuru Park, for him to take over from, you know, to be handed the reins of power by President Daniel Arap Moi, as he was then. I could see in him pain, and certainly he didn't look comfortable and sure that he was heading to the right place. Of course, one may have been because of that's my own analysis, would have been because probably the accident. And then come the day to open Parliament is postponed for the first time in a very long time. And then the day comes and I see him struggling to speak to the country and from the podium. And I say to myself, God help this country, because this man, we need him. You know the politics of the season then. And as we expected, Kibaki recovered very well. You know, in his first few months, very little was done in terms of development, and people were pulling up and down. You know, gerrymanderings, you know, the guys who become very busy when the chief is not in town. They were busy then. But in 9 months into his presidency, President Kibaki was in full form. He was back. He was the man now, and he took charge of the country. And from there, the country was on a rocket
Describe that moment, Governor Kabogo, in 2002, coming from the administration that was, and now a man who carries hopes and the aspirations of a new Kenya.
As I was saying, you will find the transition was so smooth. initially because of his sickness was a problem. But when Kibaki, Mheshimiwa Kibaki, the president, became fit, and we could tell now he was fine, you saw everyone went to work. You would never see Kibaki every 2 weeks. You would miss him in public life, except Sundays when you would see him going to church. But he was busy in there working. And this is what we lack in this country. So he's a man who let the country grow, and not on autopilot. He was sitting behind the scene, you know, the way you act movies and the main serious guys are behind the scene. Kibaki took the back seat and was leading from the front, but not in public view. He didn't want public recognition as the leader then. He did what he had to do, and we will speak about it for years and years to come.
Speak about that 2002 moment, because I see the Standard carrying a headline that, you know, Kibaki stained the government that Kenyans had put so much hope in it. And it talks about the 2002 moment, that President Kibaki had a moment that he squandered. How do you feel?
He didn't squander the moment. The guy was unwell. He took over office on a wheelchair, and then he got medical complications thereafter. In 3 or 4 or 5 months, we did not know what we were expecting the worst. And once he came back on his feet, as anyone would know, Kibaki is an action man. He's not a man of maneno mingi. You know, his speeches, even if you look at his speeches then, he would hardly speak for 15 minutes. And he would say all he wants to say in 15 minutes, but he delegated work. He delegated to those that were working with him. You know, he was not a guy who wanted to do everything himself, that you have to call him for this and that to happen. He told guys, you know what to do. Do what you have to do, you know, and was very firm with that. And that way, of course, we had a few people here and there who would take advantage of their relationship with him then. He's being unwell in his first few months, you know, the Morungaros of this world. But we overcame that, and to, you know, for 8 years, Kenya was on a steady growth. And I hope that we'll get other presidents who will be able to work like President Kibaki. He was a magnanimous guy. He was a good guy.
You interacted with him, obviously now serving as president and as member of parliament for Othaya.
I remember I got into trouble once because of the fight against Mungiki. You remember there is a time Vijanas were being killed left, right and center in central Kenya, and I came out very vocal against it. And I rubbed shoulders with the snake, you know, I rattled the snake. And I got into real trouble. And I knew my days were numbered. And I went into hiding a little bit for a couple of days, waiting to see if I could get help, because an order had been released for me to be dealt with. Be that as it may, it never happened. I managed to get word to His Excellency President Kibaki, and he intervened and said, no, you can't do these things to a member of parliament. We need to get to establish what is the problem. If you have issues against him, bring them to me. Then I resurfaced. So he gave me a second life. He gave me a new lease of life. Yes.
Going back into the life of a president, leaving lecture halls to come to the Republic of Kenya, not even independent at that point. The sacrifice of a newly married man to come and sort out the problems
I've
of
seen he got married in 1961. When I was being born, is when he was getting married. And a very brilliant young man from Makerere. You would have expected him to go to white-collar jobs. But he gave his life to the Republic of Kenya. And we will remember him for the rest of our lives in Kenya as one of our best leaders then. As a young man, of course, with problems of single-party leadership, the only thing you could fault President Kibaki for was the saying that to remove Kanu is like cutting a tree with a mugumo, with a mugumo tree with a blade. But is a man who sacrificed his life for our country, and a man who you will not say he died a very wealthy person. And why he was not very wealthy and why he has died with honor is because the man was not corrupt at all, at all. If you had asked Kibaki to declare what he had, and I'm sure he had done a declaration form in 2013, if you open that form, you will find whatever he owns now in posthumous is what he declared at that time. But how about us? Those of us that are in leadership today, we have a lot of shame to cover.
All right.
Yes.
Obviously, we cannot generalize Mwai Kibaki or, box him to Mount Kenya region, right? Because that's where you come from, and that's where he came from.
How politics are local.
Absolutely. How would you rate his leadership?
He is born from Nyeri, so that gives him the right to be called a man from Mount Kenya. But he was a nationalist. He was not only the boundaries of Kenya, even the globe, the whole world. Kibaki should and will always be a respected leader the world over. Yes, he is a leader who would have fitted anywhere in the world, even in the first world. A great economist. We're unlucky that we never used that brain to benefit this country in the years before. You remember he was one of the most humiliated vice presidents. That's a story for another day, but he managed. Because of his silence, he managed to walk through it. I don't think there was anything major or crisis for President Kibaki. During the day, they appeared at OP to sign the handshake, the Nusu Mukate thing. You saw how cool he was. Even under a lot of pressure, he appeared quite cool. The only time I saw him angered is when media houses, you guys, played around with him a little bit. But he also had sense of humor. He was a nice guy. We will miss him greatly.
When I listen to the policies of your party every time you're speaking and you talk about Pesa Mfukoni and the economic policies of this country, probably speak to the heart of how Kibaki spurred economic growth in some of the people you represented as governor, as member of parliament for Juja, and the people you seek to represent.
Yes, we talk about development all the time, and we talk about how Kenya needs to move from where we are to a middle-class economy, to a working economy. But we do not tell Kenyans that they are responsible for their own growth. And this is the slogan of our party, Tujibebe, so that we are responsible ourselves to take us to the next level. Our biggest problem is corruption in the Republic of Kenya. Serious corruption. You will see corruption building itself now during electioneering period because people are looking for votes. I want to tell Kenyans, you are also partly responsible for the corruption that you find in this country. When a young man presents himself and he has the gifts of being a leader, you expect handouts from him. What does a young man do? The young man goes back to his parents and tells his parents, we need to get some land sold quickly so that I can spend a little bit of money, handouts here and there, then I'll get into office. What does this man do after he gets into office? Is to thrive to find money to replace that land. So we are causing corruption as Kenyans as we go and vote. So please vote wisely. If you want the Republic of Kenya to change to a working economy, it must start with us. And that's where Tujibebe wa Kenya Party comes from. Our belief is that the country has potential. And again, I want to tell Kenyans, if you are waiting for handouts, as Azimio would say, or as my friend Raila Odinga would say, they will give 6,000. It is a possibility. But for how long would you give 6,000 to every family that doesn't have the capacity to earn for themselves? Let's create the opportunities for Kenyans to work for themselves. A good example, in Kiambu, we started a Biashara Fund where we were able to release, I think, 340 million shillings in 2.5 years to people who would never have access to credit. Most of those bikes that you see in Kiambu, 3,400 of them were bought during that time by people who never had access to formal credit. So, tujenge taifa kwa kuamini sisi wenyewe Kenyans, we are responsible. It is our responsibility.
And in fact, at some point when residents over there went to ask Kibaki for money, he told them to go to the banks and borrow money. Obviously, because he had
that was funny, but it was real. Yes, we must now move from the era of a leader provides money. We have created this notion that even an MCA is responsible for development in the world. And that is not true. They are even stopped by law in participating directly or indirectly in development work. It is not the work of an MCA to ride on a caterpillar grader to show that he's grading roads. That's not his job. But Kenyans, we believe it is his, and we must see him working. But we got our priorities wrong as Kenyans. So we are partly to blame for where we find ourselves.
All right. Let me take
you will find Kenyans talking about excessive borrowing. And who is telling people now during the rallies? It is MPs. They are the ones who have allowed the president to overborrow. You understand? But Kenyans are told these things in rallies and they get excited.
You get excited over it. Let me take you back because you mentioned about 1992 and still in the legacy of President Mwai Kibaki. The live pictures you see there are of residents as they stream into Parliament to view the body of the late president. But when you talk about 1992, there are those who feel...
2002 or 92?
1992.
Yes.
There are those who feel like President Kibaki was a spoiler for Kenneth Stanley Jindo Matiba, who had a realistic opportunity.
I want to say every Kenyan has a dream, just like Mwai Kibaki then, just like me. I probably think one day I will be the president of the Republic of Kenya.
Okay.
So you will not tell me I'm a spoiler if I offer myself for election. It's competitive. So it's bad that we had Kibaki and the Honorable Jindo Matiba running at the same time. We would have had a Kikuyu president then. But be that as it may, it's water under the bridge. It doesn't have to be a Kikuyu. I don't know why we define ourselves with our tribes. But all politics, they say it's local. So you have to